Pick it up, sign it, or watch your daughter die." Marcus sneered, grinding the heel of his polished leather shoe into the only vial of medicine for the dying girl. He mistook money for ultimate power, seeing the man before him as nothing more than a killer architect in rags, kneeling and begging. His brazen laughter echoed through the dilapidated apartment, viewing the trampling of the destitute as a privilege of the elite. But just seconds later, the tables turned spectacularly. As he attempted to use lies to blatantly steal credit, that very useless janitor brought a billion-dollar empire to its knees. A single hand-drawn sketch on a peeling wall, a vision ahead of its time, turned an arrogant team of engineers into stunned apprentices before a true genius. The entire architectural world went dead silent. Turns out, he was no saboteur. He was Elias Thorne, the legendary Vienna valedictorian, the Pritzker Prize winner, the world once admired. When the truth about the whale's spine curves was exposed, the arrogant director suddenly shrank, trembling and pathetically cowardly in the vast shadow of the single father. If you believe that a person's worth lies not in mud-stained clothes, but in talent and a conscience that never bows to evil, share this video and hit subscribe right now. Don't forget to leave a comment to state your opinion. 1 a.m. The city beyond the tempered glass of the Zenith Tower seemed to have fallen into a deep slumber, leaving only the pale yellow streetlights fading in the cold night mist. But inside the vast main lobby paved with stark white marble, time appeared frozen in absolute, eerie silence. The space was designed to overwhelm, with soaring ceilings, colossal pillars, and crystal chandeliers sparkling like thousands of stars, all exuding the authority of a mighty real estate empire. Yet, at this hour, that magnificence felt strangely cold and distant. Amidst the emotionless perfection of upper-class architecture, a jarring sound rang out, shattering the quiet atmosphere. Squeak, squeak. It was the groan of the rusted wheels on a drab-gray cleaning cart. Elias Thorne was straining to push it across the grand hall. His figure was gaunt, lost inside a baggy blue janitor's uniform, old and frayed at the elbows. The pungent smell of cheap bleach rose from the bucket of black water on the cart, mingling with the sour scent of sweat from a long day's labor, creating a stench of poverty that contrasted sharply with the luxurious lemongrass and orange essential oil sprayed automatically from the central air conditioning system. Elias kept his head down, trying to push the cart quickly toward the service elevator area. He wanted to make himself a ghost, an invisible entity leaving no trace on this polished floor. His worn-out canvas sneakers glided lightly over the marble, trying not to make a sound, but that damn squeaky wheel kept betraying his presence. As he passed the gold-plated trash can near the reception desk, Elias's steps suddenly faltered. A large sheet of paper, crumpled violently into a ball, lay precariously on the rim of the bin, threatening to fall to the floor. It was specialized technical drawing paper, thick and carrying the distinctive smell of ink that Elias could never forget in his lifetime. A painful curiosity urged him on. Elias looked around nervously. No one was there. He reached out his hand, calloused and wrinkled from too much soaking in chemical water, and picked up the paper. He smoothed it out on the trash can lid. The crumpled creases gradually revealed a cross-sectional sketch of a high-end apartment building. Elias's dull, tired eyes suddenly lit up. It was the look of a beast, caged for too long, suddenly smelling blood. He squinted, scanning quickly over the technical specifications, the force vectors drawn in sharp black ink. But after only a few seconds, his frown deepened. "Beam structure is wrong," Elias muttered, his hoarse voice echoing in the empty space. His finger traced the main load-bearing axis of the drawing. He put the primary steel in the compression zone instead of the tension zone. With this span, the concrete will crack as soon as the formwork is removed. He's building a tomb, not a house. He shook his head, sighing with regret. The negligence and ignorance shown in this drawing were an insult to the architectural profession. Elias instinctively reached for a pen to correct it, but his hand stopped in midair. He realized who he was. He looked at the large glass window right next to him. Reflected in it was not Elias Thorne, the valedictorian of the Vienna University of Technology with a brilliant future, not the youngest Pritzker Prize winner in history with works that made the world tip its hat. The man in the mirror was a broken 38-year-old, his hair sparse and salt and pepper, his face gaunt and filled with wrinkles of worry and hardship. The eyes that once held skyscraping dreams now held only resignation and fear. Elias crumpled the paper back into a ball, throwing it hard into the trash can, as if wanting to throw away his own glorious past. He no longer had the right to judge or fix anything. Thud! A hard kick to the cart made Elias jump, nearly falling face first. The water bucket sloshed, splashing some dirty water onto the pristine white floor. "Hey, Thorne! What the hell are you doing standing there looking stupid?" A booming, bossy voice rang out right behind him. It was the night shift security captain, a large man with a beet-red face and an attitude of always wanting to trample on those weaker than him. He stepped forward, tapping his baton rhythmically on the side of the cart, his eyes scrutinizing the small puddle just splashed onto the floor. "Do you know what time it is? Mrs. Cross is about to make a surprise inspection. If she sees a single speck of dust or a dirty water stain on this floor, you better pack your bags and hit the street immediately." Elias hurriedly bent down, pulling a dry rag from his belt, dropping to his knees to wipe the water stain clean. Humiliation rose bitterly in his throat, but he swallowed it all down. He needed this job. He needed $2,000 a week to buy medicine for Sophie. "Yes, I'm sorry. I'll be done right away," Elias said, his voice soft and trembling, head still bowed low, not daring to look up at the guard. "Watch yourself. Don't make me repeat myself. Useless trash." The guard snorted coldly and walked away, the sound of his boot heels striking the floor, sounding like hammer blows to Elias's self-esteem. Elias stood up, knees aching. He continued pushing the cart toward the elevator. In his head, the dark memories of 5 years ago came flooding back, vivid and brutal, as if they happened yesterday. He heard sirens tearing through the sky. He saw the giant cloud of dust rising from the ruins of the Capitol building. He heard the wailing of the victims' families, and most painfully, the image of his wife lying motionless under the cold concrete block. It all crashed down on his shoulders, along with the verdict of public opinion and the law, killer architect. Even though he screamed that the contractor had arbitrarily changed materials, that he had warned about safety, no one believed him. They needed a scapegoat, and he was the perfect choice. Elias closed his eyes, shaking his head violently to dispel those haunting images. He took a deep breath. A strange scent hit his nose. As he passed the VIP elevator area, it was the scent of black orchid perfume, intense, seductive, and full of power. The signature scent of Victoria Cross, the woman known as the Queen of Skylines. That scent lingered in the air, overpowering even the smell of bleach on Elias, as a reminder of the unbridgeable gap between the owner of this tower and the one scrubbing it. He pushed the cart into the cramped service elevator, hidden behind luxurious wood-paneled walls. Elias's calloused finger pressed the button for the 80th floor. The number glowed bright red in the darkness of the elevator cab. Floor 80. The sanctuary of Victoria Cross, the place housing the offices of the world's leading architects, where great ideas were conceived and realized. It was the place Elias once dreamed of setting foot in as a colleague, a partner, not a janitor coming to scrub toilets at midnight. The elevator shuddered into motion, taking him higher. The change in gravity made Elias's stomach churn. He leaned his back against the cold elevator wall, staring at the floor indicator display jumping continuously. Arsher, Sisher, Lilsher. Every floor passed was a rung on the ladder, bringing him closer to the night's biggest challenge. He knew that up there lay a project that had kept Victoria Cross awake for the past 6 months. Project Icarus, a name proud, but also full of omen. Ding! The elevator bell rang, dry and decisive. The metal doors slowly slid open. A blast of cold air from the high-capacity air conditioning system rushed in, carrying the absolute silence of the highest floor. Elias pushed the cart out. The long corridor, carpeted in red velvet, led straight to the exquisitely carved black oak door of the main office. He stood there for a second, breathing deeply to calm the heart pounding wildly in his chest. Elias did not know that the moment he stepped through that oak door, fate would force him to pick up a pen again, breaking his vow of silence for the past 5 years, even though he knew clearly it was a deadly taboo that could strip away the last bit of peace for him and his daughter. The high-powered vacuum cleaner hummed steadily over the thick red velvet carpet, swallowing tiny dust particles invisible to the naked eye. Elias moved slowly, carefully, centimeter by centimeter, his shirt soaked with sweat, even though the tower's temperature was always kept cool. He didn't dare lose focus for even a second, for he understood clearly that where he stood was no ordinary office. This was a battlefield, and his weapons were merely a mop and infinite endurance. Elias pushed the cart into a hidden corner behind a potted plant, a blind spot for the security camera for a few brief seconds as it rotated. He hurriedly pulled his cracked screen smartphone from his pocket. The pale blue light illuminated the gaunt face of a father. On the screen was a live feed from the surveillance camera in his dilapidated rental apartment. In the dim light of a nightlight, Sophie lay nestled amidst a pile of old blankets. Her small chest heaved laboriously, the rhythm irregular. Each inhalation was a battle for survival. Beside the bed, an old respiratory aid machine was working at full capacity, emitting steady whirring sounds, like the countdown of a time bomb. Elias pressed the phone to his ear, straining to listen to the sound from that room rather than the vacuum cleaner beside him. Cough, cough. His daughter's dry, weak cough, transmitted through the staticky phone speaker, felt like razor blades slicing his heart. Sophie stirred, her tiny hand groping in the air, searching for her father's warmth, but touching only cold emptiness. The warning from her treating doctor that afternoon echoed in his ears again, clear and cruel. Sophie's lungs are weakening very fast, Elias. Your current living environment is too moldy and bacteria-filled. She needs an absolutely sterile environment, or at least a professional nurse on duty at night to handle sudden bronchial spasms. Without those conditions, I'm afraid. The doctor had left the sentence unfinished, but Elias understood the rest. He understood the price of life. He looked at his daughter through the screen, hot tears threatening to spill, but he swallowed them back. I'm sorry, Sophie, Elias whispered, his thumb caressing his daughter's face on the cold phone screen. Daddy has to sell his sleep to buy your breath. Just a few more weeks, and I'll have enough money to rent a better apartment. He turned off the screen, shoving the phone back into his pocket. He couldn't let emotions take over right now. He needed to focus. The $2,000 weekly salary for this night shift janitor position was an unthinkable figure for the general market. It was 5 times the normal wage, but it came with unreasonably harsh demands. Elias pushed the cart past the corridor, leading into the main office. On the wall next to the entrance hung a night shift personnel assignment board. He glanced at it. Within the past month, 5 names had been filled in for this position, and all 5 names had been crossed out with garish, brutal red ink. The first was fired for leaving a single hair on the sofa. The second was fired because the smell of fabric softener on their uniform was too strong. The third, fourth, fifth, all packed up and left after just a few days, even a few hours, carrying with them the terror of Victoria Cross's pathologically obsessive perfectionism. The underground labor world called this position the curse, a trap for those at a dead end. And Elias was the next desperate soul, betting his daughter's life on this gamble. The phone in his pocket vibrated again. Elias started, thinking something happened to Sophie. He hurriedly pulled it out to check. But it wasn't an alert from the camera. It was a text message from a strange number. But he recognized the tone immediately. It was Robert, a former colleague who once worked under him, who was now a manager for a Zenith subcontractor. Heard you're scrubbing toilets for Victoria Cross? I almost died laughing seeing your name on the cleaning staff list. Right place for a murderer. Try to wash the blood off your hands, killer architect. Elias read the message, each word like a nail driven into his eyes. That naked mockery and contempt made his blood boil. He wanted to throw the phone, wanted to scream that he was innocent, wanted to rush over and punch that vile Robert in the face. But then the image of Sophie gasping for breath appeared. He gritted his teeth, jaw muscles aching. His finger trembled as he pressed the delete button, then turned off the phone. He had no right to pride. He had no right to anger. He only had the right to work. $2,000. That was all he needed to remember. That was the last lifebuoy keeping father and daughter from drowning. Elias took a deep breath, adjusted his uniform collar, and pushed open the door to enter Victoria Cross's office. Immediately, a cold draft enveloped him. The vast room was decorated in a minimalist but extremely luxurious style. Everything was arranged so neatly, it was obsessive. Files stacked with edges straight as a ruler line. Pens on the desk turned in the same direction. The polished floor reflected the ceiling lights, like a frozen lake. Victoria Cross's presence was imprinted on every item, exuding absolute control and suffocating pressure, even though she wasn't there. Elias began his work. He wiped the glass conference table, careful not to leave any fingerprints. He vacuumed the hand-stitched leather chairs, ensuring not a single speck of dust remained. Every movement was precise, meticulous. Not the meticulousness of a janitor, but the meticulousness of an architect accustomed to the fact that an inch of error could lead to a mile of disaster. When Elias moved to the center of the room, where a massive solid black oak desk stood, his steps slowed. There, under a custom-designed spotlight, was a magnificent architectural model. It was Project Icarus. The model simulated two towering skyscrapers, connected by a suspension bridge hovering in midair at a height of 500 meters. The bridge was designed with soft, undulating curves, looking like a silver silk ribbon draped across the sky, defying all laws of physics. It was beautiful, splendid, and full of ambition, just like its owner's personality. Elias knew about this project. The entire architectural world was talking about it. It was Victoria Cross's wildest dream, and also her nightmare. 6 months had passed. Dozens of structural plans had been proposed, but none had passed the virtual wind tunnel test. Elias told himself, "Don't look, you're just the cleaner. Mop the floor around the table legs and get out immediately." He looked down, trying to focus on the oak grain on the floor. But the eyes of a genius, eyes that had once seen through the structures of Europe's greatest buildings, betrayed him. They were automatically drawn to that exquisite model, like iron to a magnet. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the simulated steel braces, the slender stay cables, the load-bearing pylons. In his mind, those inanimate plastic bars disappeared. In their place were numbers, tangled red force vectors, arrows indicating wind direction and gravity. He saw the airflow moving back and forth between the two towers, creating an extreme wind tunnel effect at that altitude. And then he saw it. Elias intended to turn and leave to save his job, save the medicine for Sophie, but his feet felt nailed to the floor. "Death point," he whispered, his voice filled with horror. On that 500-meter suspension bridge model, right at the midspan where the crosswinds intersected, there was a fatal error. An elementary aerodynamic mistake that Victoria's million-dollar engineering team, graduates from Harvard or MIT, had failed to notice or intentionally ignored to chase aesthetic beauty. They had designed the bridge too rigid. They had reinforced too much steel into the bridge belly to resist wind force, turning it into a solid fortress wall. But at that height, wind is not something to resist. Wind is a giant, invisible monster. If you build a wall to block it, it will accumulate energy and tear that wall apart. Elias shuddered. He envisioned the inauguration of the Icarus Bridge, hundreds of people strolling on it, enjoying the city view. Then a strong gust of wind blows through. The bridge shakes violently, the overloaded steel bars emit pathetic screams, and then crumble. Icarus would fall, not because beeswax was melted by the sun, but because of human arrogance, wanting to fight nature. Professional conscience, the thing he thought had died with his wife 5 years ago, suddenly rose up strongly, strangling the fear of livelihood. He stood there, in the city's most powerful room, facing a foretold disaster, and in his hand, he had nothing but a mop. The spotlight beam from the ceiling shone straight down onto the Project Icarus model, creating a halo brilliant and solitary amidst the dark room. Elias stood there, hands still gripping the mop handle tightly, but his eyes no longer saw dust or wood flooring. His pupils dilated, reflecting the image of the magnificent suspension bridge floating between two skyscrapers. To an ordinary person, it was an aesthetic masterpiece, with proud, gleaming metal curves. But to Elias, possessor of a structural genius's mind, that flashy shell was peeling away, revealing the deadly errors within. In his mind, inanimate plastic rods suddenly transformed into steel blocks, weighing thousands of tons. He saw tangled red force vectors screaming as they ran along the bridge's body. He felt the wind force at 500 meters, not as a cool breeze blowing through hair, but as giant blades of air, madly battering the bridge's sides. The current structure of Icarus, with its belly densely reinforced with steel, was like a giant shield. It was too rigid, too solid, and that was its death sentence. "Stupid," Elias muttered, his hoarse voice echoing in the silence. His calloused finger pointed at the bridge's belly, where the most braces were concentrated. They are trying to fight the wind instead of letting the wind pass. They are challenging Mother Nature with human arrogance. He shuddered, visualizing the future scenario. Inauguration Day, thousands of people would stand there, raising glasses in toast, laughing happily. Then, a crosswind appears. The bridge won't sway to dissipate the force. It will stand still and take the hit. Wind pressure will accumulate, increasing terribly until it exceeds the material's tolerance limit. And then, a loud explosion rings out. Those proud steel bars will twist and shatter like bamboo toothpicks. Icarus will fall, taking thousands of lives into the abyss, repeating the capital tragedy of years past, but on a much more catastrophic scale. Elias startled out of that terrifying train of thought. He turned his head to look at the east corner of the wall. The security camera's status light had just switched from green to blinking red. That was the signal that the auto-scan cycle had begun. According to the rule he had silently observed during his week working here, this camera would turn toward the corridor for exactly 3 minutes to check the elevator area, leaving a complete blind spot at Victoria's desk. The clock on the wall read exactly 2 a.m. 3 minutes. He had exactly 3 minutes to choose. A fierce internal struggle exploded in the miserable father's chest. On one shoulder was Sophie, his little daughter gasping for every breath at home, a child who needed this $2,000 a week salary like she needed oxygen to live. If he touched this model, if he was caught tampering with company property, he would be fired immediately. He would lose everything, and Sophie would be the one paying the price with her life. Reason screamed at him to turn his back, pick up the mop, and continue being an invisible ghost, a cowardly conformist to protect his family. But on the other shoulder were the ghosts of the 20 victims in the Capitol building collapse. It was the accusatory gaze of their families, the professional conscience that never slept within him. If he walked silently out of this room tonight, he would be safe. But when this bridge collapsed, the blood of innocent people would stain his hands red once again. He would not just be the wrongly accused, he would truly become an accomplice to death. The torment made Elias's breath come in short gasps. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead, running down his stinging nose bridge. He looked at the luxurious gold-plated pen holder placed right next to the model. Standing out among the shiny black fountain pens was a crimson-red marker. That was Victoria Cross's scepter, the weapon she used to approve or execute projects. The pen lay there, provocative, inviting, challenging the mettle of the architect sleeping within the guise of a janitor. "I cannot let tragedy repeat itself. Not again," Elias said softly, his voice trembling but containing an iron determination. The image of his late wife appeared in his mind, her eyes gentle but stern, as if reminding him of the architect's Hippocratic oath, human safety comes first. Elias let go. The mop fell to the wooden floor, creating a dry sound. It was the sound of shedding. He shed the identity of a lowly cleaner, shed the fear of a fugitive running from the past. His legs moved quickly toward the giant desk. Hands calloused and rough from cleaning chemicals reached out, grabbing the red pen. The moment his fingers touched the cool pen body, a current ran down his spine. The feeling of power from 5 years ago revived strongly. He was no longer Elias Thorne the failure. He was Elias Thorne, the Vienna valedictorian, the commander of great works. He bent over the large format technical drawings spread out next to the model. His gaze was sharp as a scalpel, scanning through the deviant technical parameters. He did not hesitate. He didn't make small corrections. Bright red cross-out strokes, decisive and powerful, appeared on the drawing, ruthlessly denying the entire 6 months of effort by the Zenith design team. Elias completely crossed out the dense steel frame at the bridge belly. The things Marcus and Victoria believed were symbols of solidity. Time ticked by second, tick-tock. In Elias's head now remained only numbers and shapes. He began to draw over the crossed-out parts. Instead of straight, rigid beams, his pen tip curved to create soft spirals, interweaving according to a magical natural law. He was simulating the spinal structure of a blue whale, perfect bioaerodynamic design, flexible vertebrae, allowing the giant animal to move gracefully under immense water pressure. And now, that principle was applied to Icarus. The bridge needed to breathe. It needed precisely calculated gaps, so the wind could slip through, minimizing drag instead of trying to block the airflow. Sweat dripped onto the table surface, but Elias didn't bother wiping it. He was in a state of flow, the most sublime state of creation. He drew an additional elastic pivot system at both ends of the bridge, allowing the entire structure to twist with the wind without breaking. Complex calculation numbers poured from the red pen tip, filling the white spaces on the paper. The scratching sound of the pen tore through the room's silence, sounding urgent and powerful. Each of his strokes was a declaration of war against obsolete standards, a salvation for future lives. But at the same time, each stroke was a step, bringing him closer to the abyss. He was betting his job, betting his honor, and betting the life of his little daughter on these red ink lines. Sometimes doing the right thing is the most dangerous thing. Will you choose silence for safety or speak up to save lives? Subscribe to the channel to see the price Elias has to pay. The vast office on the 80th floor of Zenith Tower sank into a near-absolute silence, save for the scratching sound of the marker nib on paper, creating mesmerizing rustles. In this moment, Elias Thorne was no longer the janitor with a back bent under the burden of livelihood. He had shed that tattered shell to return to his true self, a conductor orchestrating the notes of form and space. His hands, calloused and roughened by cleaning chemicals, now moved with astonishing flexibility and grace. The bright red lines flowing from the pen tip showed no hesitation or trembling. They were decisive and precise, as if pre-programmed into his every neuron over the past 5 years. On the large-format technical drawing, the originally rigid and heavy steel beam structure disappeared beneath ruthless cross-out strokes. In its place, a completely new structural system was taking shape. Elias was drawing soft, parabolic curves, interwoven in a double helix pattern. It was a perfect simulation of the blue whale's spine, a giant creature capable of withstanding immense water pressure at the ocean bottom thanks to its skeleton's superb flexibility. He applied that principle to Project Icarus, transforming the bridge from an inanimate reinforced concrete block into a living organism. It would no longer stand still to take the beating of gusts at 500 meters, but would yield to the wind, twisting gently to dissipate the impact force, just like a whale gliding through strong ocean currents. Elias's drawing speed was incredibly fast. Sweat beaded on his forehead, running down his stinging nose bridge, but he didn't bother to wipe it. All his focus was poured into the pen tip, where complex calculations about wind load, material elasticity, and natural frequency were being decoded and transformed into visual images. He was salvaging a collapsing dream, and deeper down, he was salvaging his own buried professional soul. Finishing the final stroke, Elias exhaled sharply, his chest heaving violently from excitement and tension. But the drawing alone wasn't enough. He needed them to understand why he did it. Zenith's engineers, with minds trained methodically but rigidly, might look at these curves and deem them the mad vandalism of an outsider. He needed an explanation, a key to unlock the door of their conservative thinking. Elias reached for a pad of yellow sticky notes on the desk. He tore one off, writing hurriedly. His handwriting was angular, strong, containing the urgency of a life-and-death warning. 2 rigid breaks. Let it breathe. He paused a moment, then added the most critical technical parameters, numbers he had calculated in his head in split seconds, but were worth months of supercomputer simulations. Reduce steel weight by 30%. Increase y-axis elasticity by 15%. He stuck the note neatly on the corner of the drawing, where it was most visible. The yellow of the paper stood out against the black and white of the technical drawing, and the red of the corrections, creating a warning signal impossible to ignore. Zzz. A tiny mechanical sound rang out, but in the quiet space right now, it sounded as piercing as a siren. Elias jumped, his professional trance vanishing instantly, replaced by the rushing fear of reality. He jerked his head up. The LED light on the security camera in the corner began blinking faster, and the whirring of the servo motor signaled its pivot axis was reversing. The 3-minute scan cycle had ended. In just a few seconds, that cold lens would turn back to the desk position, and his face, his actions, would be recorded clearly. Elias panicked. He hastily threw the red marker into the gold-plated pen holder. The pen hit the rim, creating a small clack. He had no time to arrange it facing the right way as before. Everything had to happen fast. He grabbed the glass cleaner bottle and the rag lying on the desk. He had to erase the traces of his presence, had to disappear as if he never existed here. His heart pounded in his chest, so hard he thought it would burst. He backed toward the door, eyes still glued to the slowly turning camera. Every split second passed like torture. He bent down to pick up the mop lying on the floor. His movements were hurried, clumsy. While bending low, the hem of Elias's baggy uniform brushed against the sharp edge of the oak desk. The hard plastic name tag, old and cracked, loosely pinned to his chest pocket by a rusty safety pin, couldn't withstand that scrape. Click. The safety pin popped open. The name tag slipped off the shirt, falling in silence. It slid lightly on the polished wooden floor, skittering under the desk, lying hidden in the shadow of the giant table leg. Elias was completely unaware of the incident. All his senses were possessed by the fear of the camera. He grabbed the mop handle, pushing the cleaning cart quickly away from the desk area, heading straight for the exit. Just as Elias's heel disappeared behind the heavy oak door, the infrared beam from the security camera swept across the exact spot where he had stood. The emotionless lens recorded the image of the still tidy desk, the model still standing there. Only the drawing changed with tangled red ink marks, but there was no human silhouette. Elias had escaped by a hair's breadth, a breathless getaway on the border of discovery and safety. He pushed the cart along the corridor, breathing heavily, sweat soaking his back. He rushed into the elevator, trembling, finger pressing repeatedly on the close button. The metal doors slowly closed, hiding the long corridor and the powerful room in the distance. Elias leaned back against the elevator wall, sliding down. He let out a long sigh, feeling like he had just shed a 1,000-pound burden. But simultaneously, a new anxiety crept into his mind. He held his hands up in front of his face, looking at the calloused palms trembling violently. What had he done? He had interfered with company property and corrected the world's leading architects. Would they recognize his good intentions, or would they consider it an act of wild vandalism by someone who didn't know his place? "Hope they understand," Elias whispered to himself, his voice echoing in the cramped elevator cab. "Hope Victoria Cross is smart enough to see the truth behind those ink strokes." He thought of Sophie. He had bet everything on this gamble. If successful, he might not be rewarded, but at least his conscience would be clear. And if he failed? Elias shuddered, daring not to think further. He stood up straight, adjusted his collar, trying to regain the sullen, resigned appearance of a laborer to continue work on the lower floors. He reached up to his left chest, out of habit, to adjust his name tag before stepping out into the main lobby. His hand touched empty space on the pocket. Elias froze. He patted all over his chest, then rummaged in his pants pockets. Nothing. Empty. His face went pale. The name tag, the only evidence identifying him in this tower, had disappeared. He tried to recall where he could have dropped it. In the restroom downstairs? In the hallway? Or worst of all, in that room? But the elevator had stopped at the ground floor. The doors opened. The fat guard was standing there staring at him. Elias couldn't go back. He couldn't risk returning to the crime scene again. He lowered his head, pushing the cart out, silently praying that the name tag had fallen in some harmless corner or had been swallowed by a vacuum cleaner. Meanwhile, on the 80th floor, silence again enveloped Victoria Cross's office. Everything seemed intact. As before, Elias entered. Cold moonlight pierced through the window glass, shining down on the glossy black oak floor. There, lying silently under the table, half hidden in the shadow, was the old white plastic card. On it, the bold black text appeared clearly under the moonlight. Elias Thorne, janitor. It lay there, quiet and dangerous, like an activated time bomb, just waiting for someone to pick it up to ignite the storm that would change everyone's fate tomorrow morning. Early the next morning, the first sunlight of the new day pierced through the dense fog covering the city, casting cold rays onto the pinnacle of Zenith Tower. This skyscraper was not merely a block of inanimate concrete and steel, it was a symbol of Victoria Cross's absolute power. While ordinary office workers were still sluggish over their morning coffee, on the 80th floor, a suffocatingly tense atmosphere had enveloped every corner from the moment the private elevator doors opened. Victoria Cross stepped out. Today she wore a perfectly tailored ivory suit, hugging her slender figure, yet exuding irresistible authority. Her golden hair was tied in a neat high bun, revealing a high, intelligent forehead, and sharp blue eyes, like a falcon on the hunt. Each of her steps on high heels struck the marble floor, creating crisp, steady, and cold sounds. The receptionists and secretaries hurriedly bowed, holding their breath and stepping aside, feeling as if the room temperature had just dropped several degrees as their queen glided past. Victoria did not return anyone's greeting. Her mind was entirely focused on Project Icarus. She had tossed and turned all night because of the consecutive failures of the wind simulations. She pushed open the black oak door to enter her private office, intending to review the entire structure herself one more time before the board meeting. But the moment she stepped in, her steps faltered. Under the spotlight still blazing from the night before, her massive desk looked different. It no longer held its usual absolute orderliness. On the large format technical drawing spread out next to the model, a blinding red color struck her vision, standing out harshly like an open wound between the monotonous black and white. Victoria frowned. She walked quickly to the desk. The sight before her made her pupils contract. Her passionate drawing, the thing the corporation had poured tens of millions of dollars into, was now riddled with ruthless cross-out marks. Someone had used her own powerful red marker to negate the entire old design and draw over it strange, soft, and undulating spirals. She didn't scream. Victoria Cross's anger was never noisy like ordinary people. It was quiet and far more terrifying. She removed her soft kidskin gloves, tossing them lightly onto the table. Her long, slender hand reached for a specialized magnifying glass with an ivory handle. She bent down, using the lens to examine every red ink stroke closely. These lines were not the impromptu vandalism of a madman or a drunkard. They were decisive, strong, and contained an extremely complex spatial geometric thinking. The person who drew them had calculated every angle, every load-bearing point precisely while drawing. These parabolic curves, simulating a creature's spine, were not only aesthetically beautiful, but also strictly adhered to the most advanced aerodynamic principles. "Who?" A single word escaped Victoria's crimson-painted lips. The voice was as light as a breath, but sharp as a razor gliding over skin, freezing the surrounding space. Just then, the office door was pushed open violently. Marcus, the project's technical director, rushed in, looking distraught. He had just received news from security about an unauthorized intrusion into the chairman's office last night. His face was pale, sweat pouring down, soaking the collar of his designer shirt. He saw Victoria standing by the defaced drawing, and the fear of being held responsible made him panic to the extreme. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I came as soon as I heard," Marcus stammered, voice trembling, hurriedly bowing low like a shrimp. He glanced at the drawing stained with red ink and quickly found a scapegoat to unload the guilt. "It must be the night shift janitor. Only he has access at that hour. That bastard vandalized company property." He looked up, trying to appear outraged to hide his managerial incompetence. He pointed at the drawing, screaming to cover up. "Ma'am, I will call the police to collar him immediately. An uneducated trash collector, living in the gutter of society, dared to touch this $1,000,000 drawing with his filthy hands? Who does he think he is? I will sue him, make him pay until he rots in jail." Marcus's words echoed in the vast room, loud and crude. He hoped this fake anger would satisfy Victoria, or at least divert her attention from the truth that he and his team had been stuck with this project for the past 6 months. "Quiet," Victoria said softly, not turning her head to look at Marcus. She was still focused on the yellow sticky note pasted on the corner of the drawing. She reached out to peel it off, holding it at eye level. The handwriting on the paper was angular, strong, exuding confidence and urgency. "2 rigid breaks. Let it breathe," Victoria murmured, reading the words again. The corner of her mouth quirked up slightly, forming a rare and unpredictable smile. A smile Marcus had never seen before. It wasn't a smile of anger, but the smile of a hunter who had just found the trail of the most precious prey. She was the one who understood the breathing philosophy in architecture best, yet none of her engineers dared to apply it so boldly like this. They were too afraid, too safe, and too worshipful of rigid steel blocks. Reduce steel weight by 30%. Increase Y-axis elasticity by 15%. Victoria continued reading the technical specs scribbled below. Crazy numbers, going against every current safety standard, yet incredibly logical in the writer's thinking. She turned to the desk phone, pressing the direct dial button to the supercomputer room in the basement. Connect server. Rerun the Icarus project simulation immediately, Victoria ordered, voice calm but full of authority. I want you to input new parameters. Take data from the red ink marks on the drawing at my desk. 3D. Scan and load. Into the system now. Marcus stood frozen in place, mouth gaping in astonishment. He couldn't believe his ears. Why wasn't the boss angry? Why didn't she fire that janitor immediately, but instead went to test the scribbles of a cleaner? He felt a vague uneasiness creeping up his spine. Cold sweat soaked the back of his shirt. He stood there, superfluous and lost, feeling like he was being turned into a clown in a play he didn't understand the script of. 10 minutes passed. The room sank into a suffocating silence. Only the sound of the wall clock's second hand, ticking steadily like a hammer pounding into Marcus's panicked mind. He stole a glance at Victoria. She still stood still as a carved statue, arms crossed, blue eyes glued to the large screen on the wall, displaying the simulation status bar. Beifender Arscher, Beifender Wuscher, Beifender Bascher. Marcus swallowed. He silently prayed for that damn simulation to fail miserably. He wanted to see the words, structure collapsed, appear to prove he was right, that the janitor was just a crazy vandal. If this design succeeded, his career would be considered over. He had spent $50 million over the past 3 years, yielding no results, while a nobody took only 3 minutes to fix everything? No, that was impossible. That was a humiliation. Ding! A clear sound rang out, signaling the simulation process was complete. The large screen flashed, displaying the 3D model of the Icarus bridge, with the whale spine structure undulating in a simulated level 12 storm. Green text appeared, brilliant and blinding. Structural integrity, 99.9%. Vibration damping, 100%. Status, perfect. Marcus stumbled back a step, legs crossing, nearly falling. He rubbed his eyes, not daring to believe what was displayed. That 99.9% figure was like a slap straight to his face, to his degrees, to his status and arrogance. Victoria Cross put down the magnifying glass, placing it gently on the table. She slowly turned around, facing Marcus. This time, her eyes no longer held a cold, emotionless look. In those eyes shone extreme contempt, a look reserved for waste with no remaining use value. She looked at him as if looking at an insect trying to cling to life pathetically. Her silence right now was scarier than 1,000 scolding words. Marcus felt himself being stripped naked, all his incompetence and deceit exposed before the Queen's sharp gaze. He knew a real storm was about to hit, and this time, the one swept away wouldn't be the bridge, but him. The large screen on the wall still glowed brightly with green text, signaling the absolute success of the simulation. But the atmosphere in Victoria Cross's office was as cold as being in the eye of a storm. She slowly removed the magnifying glass from her hand, placing it on the oak desk with a soft but decisive click. The sound rang out in the stillness, sounding like a judge's gavel striking down to deliver a verdict. Victoria no longer looked at the screen. She turned to look at Marcus, who stood cowering in the corner with a face drained of blood. "Marcus!" Victoria's voice rang out, terrifyingly calm. She walked slowly toward him, every step exuding overwhelming authority. "You are Zenith's technical director. You hold degrees from the most prestigious universities. You have a team of 50 top engineers at your disposal, and you have cost me $50 million over the past 3 years for this project. What is the result? Models that collapse before the wind even blows." She stopped right in front of him, her sharp gaze boring deep into his soul. She pointed toward the drawing, stained with red ink on the table. "Yet this morning, a nameless vandal, someone you call an uneducated trash collector, needed exactly 3 minutes and one of my pens to solve the problem you've been stuck on for half a decade. How do you explain this, Mr. Director?" Marcus opened his mouth to say something, but his throat was choked with bitterness. He felt the ground beneath his feet crumbling. His career, his reputation, everything was in danger of vanishing into thin air just because of a lowly janitor. He darted his eyes around continuously, sweating profusely, trying to find an escape route or an excuse to justify his incompetence. While Marcus's panicked gaze swept the floor to avoid Victoria's burning stare, he suddenly saw a small, white object lying hidden in the shadow under the desk. It was an old plastic card, its edges frayed. He squinted. Under the light shining down from the ceiling, the bold black text on the card appeared clearly. Elias Thorne, janitor. That name was like a bolt of lightning through Marcus's brain, awakening memories of the scandal that shook the architectural world 5 years ago. Elias Thorne, Vienna valedictorian, Pritzker Prize, and most importantly, killer architect. He recalled the collapse of the Capitol building, remembered the chief architect who had been permanently stripped of his license and cursed by society. A sinister and triumphant smile gradually appeared on the corner of Marcus's trembling lips. He realized he had just grabbed a lifebuoy. No, a heavy weapon. That janitor wasn't a hidden genius at all. He was a sinner in hiding. Such a person would never dare step into the light to claim credit. Such a person was the perfect prey for him to manipulate and trample. Marcus stealthily extended his foot, kicking the name tag deeper into the hidden corner under the cabinet, ensuring Victoria wouldn't see it. He took a deep breath, regaining a fake calm, then looked up at Victoria with a steadfast gaze full of deceit. "Ma'am, actually, I was not honest from the start." Marcus began his act, tone shifting smoothly from fear to remorse. "These drawings were not done by any janitor. They are my rough sketches." He walked closer to the drawing, placing his hand on the red spirals with fake reverence. "Last night, I stayed late to study. In a moment of deadlock, I came up with this crazy idea. I used your pen to sketch it out quickly, intending to run a simulation test this morning before presenting it to you, but because it was so different from the standards, I feared you wouldn't accept it, so I hid it and blamed someone else when I saw you were angry. I apologize for this momentary cowardice." Marcus spoke fluently, as if he had rehearsed this script hundreds of times in his head. He believed this lie was perfect. He was the technical director. It was much more plausible for him to have a breakthrough idea than to believe a cleaner did it. Victoria stood silently listening to him present. Her face showed no emotion, deep blue eyes still staring at him. Marcus was unaware that from the moment she entered the room, before he arrived, Victoria had seen the name tag lying forlornly on the floor. She had read the name Elias Thorne, and she knew exactly who the true owner of those genius strokes was. She was silent, not because she believed him, but because she was setting a trap. She wanted to see how despicable this $1 million salaried director could be. "Yours?" Victoria spoke up, voice soft but containing hidden danger. "Interesting. An idea so bold and brilliant, I almost believed it came from a completely different mind." She walked around the desk, sitting in her powerful leather chair. She interlaced her 10 fingers, placing them on the table, looking at Marcus with a faint, inscrutable smile. "Wonderful. If this is truly your work, Marcus, then you deserve recognition. I underestimated you." Marcus sighed in relief, a triumphant smile widening on his lips. He thought he had outsmarted this old fox queen. He had won. He would get the credit, get the promotion, and that Elias Thorne would sink into darkness forever. But Victoria didn't stop there. She picked up the fountain pen, rotating it gently in her hand. "However, my rule is absolute transparency," Victoria continued, her voice suddenly becoming sharp and cold. "You accused the night shift cleaner of vandalizing property. To be fair, I want you to bring the author of this trouble here. I give you exactly 1 hour." Marcus froze, his smile vanishing. "Excuse me? Ma'am, he's just a trash collector. He knows nothing about." "I want a confrontation," Victoria cut him off, her eyes flashing a challenging look. "If this drawing is yours, you won't hesitate to explain its operating principles in front of an amateur, right? Bring him here. I want to see his reaction when he learns he's falsely accused, or to see if he's truly innocent or not." She looked at her wristwatch, then looked straight into Marcus's eyes, delivering the final blow. 1 hour. Marcus, bring that man named Elias Thorne here. If you can prove this drawing is yours in front of him, I will promote you to executive vice president and double your salary. And if not, you submit your resignation and prepare to face a lawsuit for budget waste. Marcus was dead silent. He understood Victoria was suspicious, but he also saw a golden opportunity in that offer. Vice president, ultimate power. He just needed to silence Elias Thorne, and he knew how. He held Elias's dark past in his hands. A man who had lost everything like a Elias, would be easily threatened. Just a little money, or a threat of imprisonment, and that fallen architect would obediently plead guilty and offer up the credit to him. "Yes, ma'am. I will bring him immediately. You will see the truth." Marcus bowed, then turned and walked quickly out of the room. As soon as the oak door closed behind him, his face transformed completely. The fearful, fawning look disappeared, replaced by extreme cruelty and greed. He pulled out his phone, dialing the number of his trusted assistant, who specialized in dirty work. He strode along the corridor, eyes bloodshot with ambition. He didn't fear this confrontation. He would turn it into a display of his power. He would crush Elias Thorne, squeezing out the last bit of value from that genius to pave the carpet for his promotion path. "Find Elias Thorne's address for me immediately," Marcus growled into the phone, his voice hissing through his teeth. "I need to know which hole he's hiding in. I need to teach him a lesson about who the true master of this drawing is." He rushed into the elevator, pressing the button for the parking garage. His supercar was waiting. The engine roar echoed in the empty garage like the wild laughter of a demon. The car sped off into the morning mist, tearing apart the city's peace, heading straight for the dilapidated slum in the suburbs. Marcus is rushing to Elias's home with the intent to blatantly steal credit. He brings money, power, and threats to crush a desperate father. Will Elias bow his head, selling his honor and effort to protect the safety of his little daughter? Or will he stand up against the giant, wanting to swallow him? Hit subscribe right now, so you won't miss the breathtaking confrontation in the next part, where the line between good and evil will be decided by a tear-soaked signature. Leaving the cold, sterile glamour of Zenith Tower, Elias Thorne felt thrown back into the naked and cruel reality of the suburban slums. The old night bus dropped him at the head of a muddy alley as the clock struck 4 a.m. Cold wind slipped through his thin jacket, carrying the dampness of night mist and the stench of stagnant waste rising from open sewers. Elias didn't walk, he ran. His legs, weary after a grueling shift, were now powered by an invisible fear present in every beat of a father's heart. The father and son's rental room was nestled at the end of a row of crooked single-story houses where the flickering streetlights never reached. As soon as Elias inserted the key into the rusty lock, a hauntingly familiar smell hit his nose. It wasn't the smell of hot rice or fresh fabric softener, but the distinctive, musty odor of walls soaked with rain for too long, mixed with a sour, pungent taste of sickness and death lurking somewhere in the cramped space. Elias pushed the door open, throwing his frayed backpack onto the floor. The room was pitch dark, lit only by the weak light from a moon-shaped nightlight plugged into the wall corner, but that much light was enough for him to see the scene that made his blood freeze. On the rickety single bed, Sophie lay curled up like a small shrimp. The old cotton blanket had been kicked to the floor in her struggle. The 8-year-old's face was pale, gradually turning a lifeless purple. Her small chest heaved violently, trying desperately to suck in gulps of air, but it seemed an invisible hand was squeezing her throat tight. "Daddy's home, Sophie. Daddy's home, baby." Elias rushed to the bedside, knees hitting the cold, tiled floor hard, but he felt no pain. He supported his daughter's shoulders, feeling her small body trembling violently and cold sweat pouring profusely on her hot forehead. Sophie opened her dull eyes, trying to find her father's face in the dim darkness, but her consciousness was slipping away due to lack of oxygen. Elias reached for the old nebulizer placed on the plastic chair next to the bed. The machine was taped up with black electrical tape, the air tube yellowed with time. He flipped the switch. Whir. The machine's motor sounded weak and intermittent, just like Sophie's breath right now. Elias hurriedly opened the medicine drawer, his hand trembling as he rummaged through a pile of empty boxes. His finger touched a small, cold glass vial. He held it up to the nightlight. Elias's heart constricted. Only a meager amount of solution remained at the bottom of the vial, just enough for one last run. This was the only dose of Ventolin left in the house. He inverted the vial, trying to coax every precious drop into the nebulizer cup, careful not to spill even a tiny droplet. Crazy numbers danced in his head. His bank account was around zero. This week's salary hadn't been paid. If this dose didn't break Sophie's asthma attack, or if she had another attack tomorrow, he would have nothing left to save her. Despair strangled the father's heart, more painful than any physical wound. He felt useless, pathetic. An architect who once drew billion-dollar skyscrapers now couldn't afford a $15 vial of medicine to keep his daughter alive. He placed the nebulizer mask over Sophie's nose and mouth, holding it tight with both hands to ensure no medication escaped. A thin white mist began to spray out, creeping into the child's spasming airways. "Daddy!" Sophie wheezed through the plastic mask, her voice strangled and distorted into shrill hisses through her teeth. Her tiny, gaunt hand groped in the air, then clutched Elias's calloused thumb tightly. Her purple fingernails dug deep into his flesh, as if finding an anchor to avoid being swept away by a flood. "I can't breathe. It hurts, Daddy." His daughter's whimpering was like salt rubbed into Elias's soul. Tears welled up, hot and salty, but he swallowed them back. He wasn't allowed to cry right now. Sophie needed him strong. If he collapsed, she would panic, and panic would kill her faster than the disease. "Hang in there, baby. The medicine is going in." "Listen to Daddy," Elias whispered, his voice warm and decisive, trying to transmit his meager life energy to his child. He brought his face close to hers, using a steady gaze to reassure Sophie's wide, fearful eyes. "Breathe deep. 1, 2, 3. Breathe out slowly. That's right. Follow Daddy's hand rhythm. Don't be scared. Daddy is here. No one can hurt you." He used his other hand to stroke her chest gently, trying to soothe the painful diaphragm spasms. Every breath of Sophie's was a battle, and Elias was fighting alongside his child in every split second. While waiting for the medicine to take effect, Elias's sleep-deprived, bloodshot eyes darted around the leaky rental room. The scene striking his eyes was a cruel irony of fate. On the walls mottled with green mold stains, where cold wind often blew in through cracks, were pasted large sheets of yellowed paper. Not cheap wallpaper. Those were the once illustrious architectural drawings of Elias Thorne, the sketch of the Vienna Opera House, the design of the Berlin Central Library, and even the first drawing of the fateful Capitol building. Masterpieces, once praised by experts as the future of modern architecture, once valued at millions of dollars, now served as cheap patches to block drafts, covering the rot of this slum house. They lay there, silent and crumpled, witnessing their creator's collapse. Elias looked at the proud strokes of yesteryear, then looked down at the dying daughter in his arms. What use was a great career? What use was innate talent when he couldn't even build a safe wall to shelter his child? Buzz, buzz. The phone in Elias's pocket vibrated violently, breaking his concentration. He glanced at the screen, lighting up in the dark. A text from the landlord. "If you don't have $300 for rent by tomorrow morning, pack up and hit the streets." Elias closed his eyes, a feeling of helplessness surging. He turned off the phone, tossing it aside on the blanket. He didn't want to hear, didn't want to see anything from the outside world anymore. He just wanted the world to stop turning, time to stop flowing, so he could wholeheartedly fight for every breath for Sophie. He silently prayed to any god listening, or even begged his late wife's soul to give him a little more time. Just let her survive this crisis, and he was willing to do anything, even sell his soul. But it seemed God had forgotten the father and daughter. From outside the deserted alley, a strange sound rang out, getting clearer. The screech of expensive rubber tires grinding on jagged gravel, breaking the night's silence. Not a garbage truck, not a police patrol car. It was the smooth but powerful engine sound of a luxury car, a sound completely alien in this destitute area. High-intensity LED headlights swept across the rotten window, casting sharp, blinding streaks of light into the dark room, illuminating dust motes floating in the air. Elias squinted against the glare, an ominous feeling hitting him, colder than the winter wind. He heard car doors slamming, hurried, heavy footsteps pounding on the damp ground, heading straight for his door. Who could be looking for him at this hour? Creditors? Police? Or was it the consequence of what he did at Zenith Tower last night? Elias dared not take his hand off the nebulizer mask. He hugged Sophie tighter, his body tense as a bowstring, bracing himself to face whatever danger was approaching. He was still counting breaths for his child, trying to maintain the last fragile bit of calm. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in. Suddenly, the rotten wooden door behind his back shook violently. No polite knock, just pure violence. Wham! A thunderous kick struck the flimsy door, making the rusty hinges groan pitifully. Wood splinters flew into the room. A fierce storm had arrived right at the doorstep, bringing destruction, threatening to blow out the weak flame of life Elias was trying to protect with his own life. The rotten wooden door, the final shield separating the cruel outside world from the father and son's small nest, had completely surrendered to the power of money and violence. It burst from its rusty hinges with a jarring bang, slamming hard into the opposite wall, creating patchy cracks in the peeling plaster. Wood dust and mortar flew everywhere, mixing with the blinding car headlights shining straight in from the yard, creating a chaotic and surreal scene like a nightmare. From within that dust cloud, Marcus stepped in. He no longer bore the dignified, groomed appearance usually seen in the high-class office on the 80th floor of Zenith Tower. His shirt was disheveled, tie loosened, and his eyes bloodshot with veins of insane rage. He looked like a wounded beast just escaped from its cage, carrying a thick, murderous aura that overwhelmed even the musty smell of the room. Behind him, 2 large bodyguards loomed in, their shadows stretching long on the floor, swallowing the weak light from the nightlight. "You ragged beggar, thought you could hide from me?" Marcus roared, his voice hoarse and containing extreme hatred. He looked around the dilapidated rental room with contemptuous eyes, as if the poverty here sullied his expensive Italian leather shoes. His gaze stopped at Elias, who was kneeling by the bed, hugging his daughter tightly, and the presence of that rugged man seemed to further fuel the mad fire within him. He couldn't accept that such a lowly person dared to surpass him, dared to insult his intellect with a genius drawing. Without waiting for Elias to react or say a word, Marcus lunged forward. He swung his leg, kicking away the old wooden table blocking the path. The kick contained all the frustration and malice of someone cornered. The wooden table flew with terrible force, crashing hard into the makeshift medicine cabinet made of cheap pine slats hanging on the wall. Crash! The strong impact made the cabinet shake violently, tilt, and then collapse. Empty boxes fell scattered onto the floor, but most disastrous of all was the small glass medicine vial perched precariously on the edge of the shelf. It slid out of position, falling freely through the air. Time seemed to freeze in Elias's eyes. He saw the vial spinning under the light, reflecting the last ray of hope for his daughter. Smash! The sound of shattering glass rang out dryly, sharply, severing Elias's taut nerve strings. The only vial of Ventolin, the life-saving medicine he had scraped every penny to buy, shattered to pieces upon hitting the hard tile floor. The clear liquid solution splashed out, mixing with dirt and sharp glass shards glittering like deadly diamonds. No! Elias's heart-rending scream rang out, sounding like the cry of a trapped animal. By survival instinct, he should have rushed out to try and salvage whatever medicine was left on the floor. But fatherly instinct won over everything. He saw the glass shards flying toward the bed, where Sophie lay curled up. He didn't think, didn't hesitate for even a millisecond. Elias threw himself forward, using his gaunt back to completely shield his daughter, turning his body into a living shield. Shards embedded themselves in his thin shirt, some piercing the fabric to cut into his flesh, but Elias grit his teeth without uttering a sound. He only cared about Sophie, but his sacrifice couldn't stop the tragedy unfolding. The loud noise, the violent intrusion, and the strong smell of medicine rising from the floor stimulated Sophie's sensitive nerves. Panic hit like a tsunami, drowning out the girl's remaining weak strength. Sophie's eyes went wide, pupils dilating in extreme fear. Her chest constricted, bronchial muscles spasming violently, blocking all airflow. Sophie's breathing shifted from wheezing to a shrill hiss, sounding like the siren of a ship sinking to the ocean floor. Her face turned from pale to a deep purple. She tried to open her mouth to gasp for air but couldn't, hands clawing at the air in vain. The liquid medicine flowed freely on the floor, quickly soaking into the dirty sand and soil, evaporating uselessly before Elias's eyes. That was money, blood, and the breath of his daughter, all crushed by Marcus under his ruthless heel. Still trying to play shield, Marcus stepped forward, not caring a whit about the child's life or death. He roughly grabbed the collar of Elias's shirt from behind, using the strength of a well-fed man to yank the frail father away from his daughter. Elias fell backward, head hitting the hard ground, but he hurriedly scrambled up, intending to rush toward Sophie. But a bodyguard quickly stepped in, kicking him hard in the stomach, doubling him over in pain. Marcus bent down, grabbing Elias's hair, forcing him to lift his face to look at him. The distance between the two faces was just a few spans. Elias smelled expensive perfume mixed with strong liquor on the director's breath, the scent of depravity and rotten power. "Do you know who you just messed with, you piece of trash?" Marcus hissed, spittle hitting Elias's face. He stared into the fallen architect's burning eyes of hatred. He knew his weakness, knew his painful past, and he would use it as a knife to gouge deeper into that wound. "A murderer stripped of his license like you dares to scribble on my model? Who do you think will believe the word of someone who buried 20 people under reinforced concrete? Do you think this society will tolerate a killer architect returning to practice?" Every word of Marcus was like a sledgehammer blow to Elias's head. The title, Killer Architect, he had tried to bury for 5 years, was now dug up, naked and cruel, right in front of his daughter. Marcus wasn't just beating his body, he was destroying his dignity. Marcus sneered, a twisted and poisonous smile. He released Elias's hair, letting his head droop. He stood up straight, pulling a pre-prepared stack of papers and a shiny fountain pen from his suit pocket. "I will throw you in jail to rot for property damage and illegal practice. I will ensure your kid is thrown into an orphanage, where she will die slowly without care, unless—" He threw the papers down right into the puddle of dirty medicine mixed with water and mud at Elias's feet. The pristine white paper was quickly soaked, stained with black dirt, just like the conscience of the one offering it. "Sign here. Admit that you stole my idea, that you are just a lowly copycat. Sign the transfer of all copyright for the Icarus design to me. Do that, and I'll spare your dog life and give you a few bucks to buy a coffin for your kid." Elias looked at the paper lying in the dirty puddle. It was a death sentence for his honor, a confirmation of a blatant lie that would follow him for life. But then, his ears heard Sophie's increasingly weak hissing. The girl was fading away. Her lips had turned blackish purple, eyes rolled back toward the ceiling. Sophie's life was being counted in seconds, and Elias had nothing left to bargain with. He was no longer the Vienna valedictorian, no longer the hero of great works. He was just a helpless father, ready to crawl between the enemy's legs in exchange for a breath for his child. Marcus saw the collapse in Elias's eyes. He knew he had won. He smirked, slowly lifting his foot. His expensive leather shoe sole, caked with mud from outside, placed straight onto the edge of the commitment paper, right in the middle of the evaporating medicine puddle. He stomped down hard, grinding the paper into the filthy floor, forcing Elias to perform the most humiliating act of his life. "Pick it up, sign it, or watch your child die." Sophie struggled no more. Her small chest only vibrated with final weak waves. The space around Elias went dark, leaving only the stained white paper under the devil's heel. He tremblingly reached out his calloused hand, fingers touching the cold puddle, touching the utter humiliation, preparing to sell his soul cheap to save the dying little angel behind his back. The space inside the dilapidated rental room felt compressed, thick, and suffocating to the point of breathlessness. The whistle of wind blowing through the broken door cracks, mixed with Sophie's increasingly weak gasps, created a mournful soundtrack for the tragedy unfolding. Elias knelt on the cold floor, his knees submerged in a slimy mixture of nebulizer medicine, mud, and dirty water. Glass shards from the broken vial embedded in his flesh, bleeding, but that physical pain was nothing compared to the bleeding wound in the father's soul. He raised his head, bloodshot, tear-filled eyes looking toward Marcus. The technical director stood there, arrogant and clean in an expensive suit, arms crossed with the cold expression of someone holding the power of life and death. The smirk on his lips was like a knife slicing through Elias's despair. He was enjoying this moment, the moment of seeing a genius who once stood at the peak of fame, now crawling at his feet like a worm. "Please, I beg you." Elias's voice was lost, distorted and broken, sounding no longer human. He clasped his hands together, pleading toward his enemy. "Call an ambulance. Please, she's dying. I'll do anything you want. Just save my child." Marcus remained unmoved. He looked at the watch on his wrist, then looked down at the cyanotic child on the bed with ruthless indifference. To him, Sophie's life was just a bargaining chip, a tool to force Elias into complete submission. "Sign first," Marcus said, his voice cold and curt. He jerked his chin toward the commitment paper lying soggy on the floor. "I told you, I don't do charity. You want your kid to live? Fine. But the price is the truth. Admit you're a thief. Admit you're a fraud who stole my idea, and disappear from this city forever." He took a step forward, his polished shoe sole grinding on the edge of the paper, pressing it deeper into the mud, as if wanting to drown Elias's last bit of honor in the gutter. "Decide quickly. Your kid's lungs won't wait." Elias turned to look at Sophie. Her chest was only heaving with very slight rhythms. Her eyes had begun to cloud over, focus gradually vanishing. Life was slipping through his fingers like sand. He had no time to consider, no time to fight for justice or truth. Between the honor of a great architect and his daughter's breath, the choice was too clear. Elias had lived his whole life for professional pride. He remembered the day he stepped onto the podium to receive the prestigious Pritzker Prize, remembered the thunderous applause in Vienna when he graduated valedictorian. He had once sworn to use his talent to create great, honest, and sustainable works. But now, all those past glories, those sacred vows, became meaningless before the fragility of his little daughter's life. What use is a famous architect if he can't save his own child? What meaning does a hero of humanity have if he is a failed father? Elias tremblingly reached out. The calloused hand that once drew exquisite lines was now covered in mud and blood. He picked up the fountain pen, lying beside a shard of broken glass. The pen body was cold and slippery with Ventolin. He gripped it tight, tight enough to make his knuckles turn white. "I will sign." Tears streamed down Elias's face, dripping onto the smudged commitment paper. He bowed low, forehead touching the freezing floor in the most humiliating prostrate position. "I am a thief. I am a liar." Elias repeated every word Marcus wanted to hear, each word uttered, tearing his throat apart. He was strangling his own honor with his own hands, smearing mud on the Thorne family name himself. "Just please, save my child, please." Marcus laughed loudly, a wild laugh echoing throughout the cramped room. He pulled out his phone, switched on recording mode, pointing the lens at Elias, kneeling on the ground. "Hurry up!" he shouted, thumb pressing the record button. "I don't have all day to watch a tragedy. Sign it, and look at the camera, and repeat what you just barked, so I can send it to Mrs. Victoria to see the true face of the fraud." Elias took a deep breath, the metallic smell of blood and the stench of sewers filling his lungs. He placed the nib on the soaked paper surface. The thin paper seemed to buckle under the weight of the nib. He began to write. Scrawled, trembling letters appeared, a distorted E, a crooked L. This was the signature selling his soul, the signature that would nail him to the pillar of eternal shame, the signature that would turn him from a wrongly accused victim into a true sinner in the eyes of history. But he accepted it, for Sophie, for her smile, for her right to breathe this air. The nib moved, black ink mixing with dirty water, spreading to form ugly black stains. Elias closed his eyes, resigning his fate to the devil. He had lost. Evil had won. In this cruel world, honest people had no place, and truth was a luxury item a poor wretch like him could never afford to buy. But just as the final stroke of the signature was about to be completed, just as Marcus was smirking, preparing to enjoy his complete victory, a current of air colder and sharper than a scalpel suddenly rushed in from the broken main door. "No need to sign anything." That voice rang out, not loud, but so powerful and steely it shook the space. It cut through Marcus's laughter, stopped Elias's pen, and seemed to freeze time itself. It was the voice of true power, power not coming from threat or violence, but from the position of someone standing at the peak, looking down at the antics of insects. Marcus jumped, nearly dropping his phone. Elias snapped his eyes open, the pen slipping from his hand, falling into the puddle with a small plop. Both men, one standing at the peak of arrogance, one sinking at the bottom of despair, turned their heads simultaneously to look at the door. Standing there, in the broken door frame, backlit by the blinding car headlights, was a silhouette slender yet towering like a spire. The night wind blew the flap of a pristine white suit, creating the image of a judging god just descended into living hell to restore order. Victoria Cross's appearance at the threshold of the dilapidated rental room was like the descent of a goddess of justice from myths, yet bearing the bone-chilling coldness of a supreme judge. The rotten wooden door shattered under her feet. Splinters flew, but dared not touch the pristine white trouser hem of this powerful woman. Victoria stood there, her sharp gaze sweeping across the chaotic scene in the room, from the smashed medicine cabinet and the spilled solution on the floor to the image of the father kneeling in the most humiliating posture. The overwhelming aura radiating from her froze the cramped, damp space instantly. All prior noise died out. Marcus, who stood at the peak of arrogance just seconds ago, now cowered like a sewer rat caught in headlights. The malicious smile on his lips vanished, replaced by extreme horror. He recognized that voice. He recognized that figure. It was the biggest nightmare of his life. Mrs. Victoria, Marcus stammered, his voice trembling so much it was soundless, his face drained of blood, eyes darting around looking for an escape. But the two bodyguards behind him had stepped back, terrified by the true boss's authority. In panic, Marcus's first reflex was to hide his guilt. He hurriedly crumpled the humiliating commitment paper he had just forced Elias to sign, hiding it behind his back, with hands soaked in cold sweat. He tried to force a twisted smile, intending to open his mouth to justify his brutal actions, but Victoria gave him no chance. She didn't even glance at him once. To her, right now, Marcus was just a speck of dust, meaningless noise, not worth bothering about. She glided past him as if he were invisible air, stepping steadily toward the puddle of dirty water where Elias and his daughter were wrestling with death. Victoria's designer high heels, which had never touched anything less luxurious than velvet carpets or marble, now stepped straight onto the floor, slimy with mud and broken medicine. She didn't even frown. She knelt down. The action was so natural and decisive, it stunned the whole room. The Queen of Skylines, the Iron Lady of Real Estate, was kneeling in the muddy puddle of a stinking slum house. The knees of her ivory suit were instantly stained black by dirty water, but Victoria didn't care. All her attention was focused on the cyanotic child on the bed and the trembling man holding the pen beside her. As she bent down to eye level with Elias, her gaze inadvertently swept across the mottled wall behind him. There, where peeling plaster revealed old fired bricks, a large, yellowed sheet of paper was pasted. It wasn't wallpaper, but a detailed hand-drawn sketch. Victoria froze. Her pupils dilated as she recognized the familiar lines. It was the primitive sketch of Project Icarus, but drawn entirely in charcoal pencil. The spirals simulating whale spines, the elastic pivot system, all were present there, meticulous and precise to the millimeter. And right below the drawing, a line handwritten neatly in bold pencil struck her eyes, causing a powerful tremor in the powerful woman's mind. For Sophie, so you will always be safe. A lightning bolt of realization struck straight into Victoria's heart, dispelling all remaining doubts and prejudices. All her life, she lived in the fierce marketplace, where everything was valued by money, where architects drew for fame, contractors built for profit. She had thought Elias corrected her drawing to show off, to take revenge on life, or seek an opportunity to return to the profession. But she was wrong. This man didn't fix the tower for money. He didn't fix it for vain glory. He fixed it for love. He had spent countless sleepless nights studying that structure with a single purpose: to create a safer world for his little daughter. To Elias, Icarus was not a billion-dollar project. It was a symbol of the protection he wanted to give Sophie. That sacred fatherly love had turned a desperate father into the greatest genius Victoria had ever known. Choking emotion rose in her chest, but Victoria quickly suppressed it. This was not the time for sentimentality. Sophie's life was hanging by a thread. The instinct of a leader rose strongly. She pulled the latest model phone from her suit pocket, slender fingers pressing the emergency dial key reserved for the elite. Code blue. I repeat, code blue. Victoria's voice rang out, steely and commanding, drowning out the whistling wind outside. Dispatch a medical helicopter to my coordinates immediately. Patient condition: child, 8 years old, grade 4, respiratory failure, history of severe asthma. Request portable ventilator and the best pediatric team. I give you exactly 5 minutes. If you are 1 second late, your hospital will lose all funding. She hung up, tossing the phone aside on the blanket. Her eyes turned back to look at Elias. The rugged man was still kneeling there, calloused hand clutching the mud-stained fountain pen, his whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. He looked at her with bewildered eyes, confused, daring not to believe what was happening before his eyes. He still thought he was dreaming, or this was another cruel joke of fate. Victoria reached out. Her soft, manicured hand grasped Elias's rough, dirty hand. She gently but firmly pried each of his stiff fingers from the cold fountain pen body. You don't need it anymore, Elias. She took the pen from his hand, and with a decisive motion, she threw it far toward the corner of the room where Marcus stood. The pen hit the wall, shattering, black ink splattering onto the terrible director's shiny leather shoes. You don't need to sell your talent to the devil. You don't need to bow to anyone to protect your child anymore, Victoria said, her voice lowering, containing deep sincerity and respect. She looked deep into the sunken eyes, full of crow's feet, of the single father. In those eyes, she saw pain, sacrifice, and a vast sky of great love. She realized that even if she owned 100 skyscrapers, she had never been as rich as the man kneeling before her. You saved my tower with your talent, Victoria continued, every word like an iron commitment. Now, let me save your world. Elias looked at her, tears spilling from the corners of his eyes, rolling down his gaunt cheeks, mixing with dirt to form long streaks. For the first time in 5 long years living in darkness and contempt, he felt a hand truly reach out to grab him, pulling him up from the mud of despair. Thwack, thwack, thwack. From afar, the familiar engine sound rang out, growing louder. The sound of blades chopping the air created powerful whistles, tearing through the silent night sky of the slum. Powerful spotlights from above shone down, piercing through the hole-riddled corrugated roof, lighting up the room like daylight. Wind from the helicopter blades blasted down, kicking up blinding dust, shaking the weak walls. That powerful gust blew everything in the room around. The shameful commitment papers Marcus was trying to hide behind his back were blown from his hands by the wind. They flew everywhere in the room, hitting the walls, hitting his face like slaps of justice. Marcus stood, rooted in the middle of the storm, watching evidence of his guilt exposed under the blinding light of the helicopter, his face twisted in fear. He knew judgment time had come, and there was no hiding place for the deceitful under the blinding light of truth. The wind from the helicopter blades was still roaring violently outside, whipping up the slum's dust and garbage into a chaotic mist. But inside the dilapidated rental room, a new order was being established by people in white coats descending from the sky. The emergency medical team, equipped with the most advanced gear, rushed into the room with astonishing speed and professionalism. They brushed aside Marcus's 2 large bodyguards like meaningless obstacles, taking control of the space around Sophie's small bed. A pediatrician quickly applied a specialized oxygen mask to the girl's cyanotic face. The shrill wheezing of the asthma attack was immediately replaced by the soothing hiss of pure oxygen being pumped into her lungs. Skilled fingers injected bronchodilators directly into her vein. Only seconds later, Sophie's violently spasming small chest began to relax. Her breathing gradually returned, still weak but more regular. A rosy color began to creep back onto her pale cheeks, a sign of life reviving strongly from the brink of death. Elias, who had collapsed on the floor, bruised and exhausted, was helped up by 2 other medics. They carefully placed him on a stretcher. Through blurred tears, Elias saw his daughter had passed the critical stage. He turned his head, looking for the silhouette of the woman who had brought this miracle. Victoria Cross still stood there, amidst the cluttered ruins, her white suit stained with mud, but her posture remained upright and proud, like a goddess of war who had just won a victory. Elias's gaze met hers, containing infinite gratitude mixed with extreme astonishment. He wanted to say thank you, but his throat was choked with bitterness, unable to utter a word, only able to nod slightly in place of 1,000 unspoken words. As the stretcher carrying Sophie and Elias was moved toward the helicopter, Victoria slowly stood up straight. She lightly dusted off her sleeves, her movements leisurely and terrifyingly calm. Then she turned around, facing Marcus. The technical director was now standing with his back against the wall, face drained of all blood. He looked at Victoria as if seeing the Grim Reaper approaching with a scythe. He knew this woman's power well. A nod from her could lift a nobody to the clouds, but a shake of her head was enough to drown a powerful man in the 9 levels of hell. "Marcus," Victoria spoke, her voice cold and steely, piercing through the helicopter engine noise like a poisoned arrow. "You are fired immediately. All your positions, authority, and shares at Zenith are stripped as of this moment." Her declaration was not an administrative decision. It was a sentence. Marcus trembled, his knees going soft, causing him to collapse onto the dirty floor, right at the spot where he had just forced Elias to kneel. "Ma'am, please listen to my explanation," Marcus stammered, trying to salvage a last bit of hope with his familiar slipperiness. He pointed toward the receding stretcher. "He is a murderer. You cannot trust a low-class laborer like him. He is the killer architect. He collapsed the Capitol building. I did all this just to protect the company's reputation, to protect you from a criminal," he screamed, trying to use Elias's dark past as a shield to cover his own sins. He believed that, no matter what, a business person like Victoria would never accept standing on the side of someone with a stain on their record. But Victoria did not waver. She looked down at him with fiery eyes, burning away all the pretense and lies he was trying to construct. "I know who the real murderer is, Marcus," Victoria cut him off, her voice sharp as a razor. "Do you think I didn't investigate? 5 years ago, when the Capitol building collapsed, Elias Thorne was the only one who refused to sign the material acceptance report. He warned about the steel quality." She stepped closer, her shadow looming over Marcus, creating a suffocating pressure. "And I also know that you, who were an advisor to the subcontractor at the time, took a $2 million bribe to swap the tempered steel batch for cheap, recycled steel. You used underground power to force the board to blame Elias, turning him into a scapegoat to hide your crime. The Capitol case file will be reopened tomorrow morning. I have had the legal team collect enough evidence of your secret accounts in Switzerland." Marcus collapsed completely. He sat flat on the ground, eyes wide and vacant. The darkest secret, the rotting corpse he had carefully buried for half a decade, was now dug up naked under the glaring light. He was not only losing his job, losing his honor, but he was about to lose his entire life behind prison bars. Victoria looked at him one last time, a look of contempt reserved for trash not worth recycling. "And don't forget," she added, delivering the final punishment blow. "Besides the corruption and indirect murder charges from years ago, you just committed another crime: intentional injury and threatening a child's life. Pray your lawyer is good enough to defend you in court, because I will personally testify against you." Finished speaking, Victoria turned and walked decisively toward the waiting helicopter. Wind from the blades blew her hair, creating the image of a queen of justice who had just completed her mission to purge evil. She stepped onto the helicopter, the door closing, separating her and Elias's family from the filthy world below. The helicopter roared, slowly lifting off the ground, carrying the hope of life and a new future for honest people. On the ground, amidst the desolate ruins of the rental room, Marcus collapsed in madness. He pulled his hair, screaming meaningless sounds in despair. He had lost everything: money, power, freedom. And then, from far away at the head of the alley, another sound rang out, merging with the whistling wind. The urgent, steely siren of police cars tore through the night. Flashing red and blue lights reflected on the puddles on the road, signaling the permanent end to the impostor's days of rampage. The net of heaven is vast. Though the mesh is wide, nothing escapes. Marcus Thorne, who once stood at the peak of fame through deceit, was now waiting for the cold handcuffs to lock his guilty hands tight, closing a dark chapter full of injustice. 1 year later, the city's night sky no longer bore the gloomy, cold look of that fateful night. Instead, it was a sea of brilliant light from thousands of high-power floodlights illuminating the newest architectural wonder just completed. The Icarus Bridge, Zenith's pride, now wound proudly across the void connecting the two skyscraper peaks. With the unique whale spine simulation design, shiny silver steel bars interlaced to create a soft metal silk ribbon, both solid and flexible, defying every harsh rule of storm winds. On the podium of honor draped in solemn red carpet, Elias Thorne stepped up under blinding spotlights and thunderous applause. The rugged man in the baggy janitor's uniform, with the strong smell of bleach, had completely disappeared. Standing before thousands of camera lenses now was the new chief architect of Zenith, in an exquisitely tailored black suit. The poise and confidence of the Vienna valedictorian returned intact. Beside him, the first-class practicing license, restored with honor, sat solemnly in a gold-plated frame, proof that justice had been served. Villains like Marcus were now paying the price for their sins behind cold prison bars, returning purity to Elias's talented hands. Victoria Cross stood back, silently observing her partner shine. She smiled, a smile of relief and pride. For the first time in her illustrious career, the real estate queen voluntarily ceded the stage aura to someone else, for she understood that tonight belonged to Elias. Elias cast his eyes down to the first row. There, Sophie sat neatly, in a pretty white dress, like a little angel. Her face was rosy, eyes sparkling bright, and chest heaving with healthy breathing rhythms, no trace left of the cruel disease of years past. Sophie held high, a drawing done in scribbly crayons, but filled with love, the image of a man in a Superman cape, using his hands to support both the tower and the sky. The words, "Dad is my hero," written neatly underneath, made Elias's heart melt. He leaned close to the microphone, his warm, deep voice echoing across the vast square. "I once thought architecture was the aspiration to conquer, concrete and steel pillars reaching high to touch the blue sky. But after all the past upheavals, I now understand that the true mission of architecture is not to show off power. It is born to shelter, to protect the small lives down below, to ensure that every child has a safe home to grow up and breathe in." Just then, a strong night wind blew past. Instead of shaking violently or emitting the groans of overloaded metal, the Icarus Bridge shuddered gently into motion. The steel vertebrae twisted rhythmically, undulating with the wind smoothly as the ocean's breath. It was breathing with the city's pulse, exactly like the passionate design Elias had drawn with his very life. Applause exploded, lasting endlessly. Sophie couldn't contain her emotion. She rushed onto the stage. Elias knelt down, spreading his arms to welcome his daughter. Father and son embraced amidst a sea of flowers and light, creating a living monument to sacred fatherhood. Victoria stood watching the scene, the corners of her eyes stinging. She realized that no matter how many more skyscrapers she built, this peaceful reunion moment was the greatest and most meaningful masterpiece of her life. Elias lifted Sophie up, looking up at the starry night sky with tear-filled eyes. He whispered into the endless void, where he believed his late wife was smiling down, watching over them. "I did it, honey." The Icarus Bridge shone brilliantly against the pitch-black sky, solid and enduring, like an eternal testament that talent and kindness might be buried under the dust of poverty and injustice, but they will never die. Given just one chance, one ray of truth, they will rise again stronger than ever. There are stories that do not end at the moment the villain is handcuffed. They only truly conclude when the truth is preserved, intact, undistorted, and never buried again. Elias did not become a hero because he was stronger than the system, or because he won through violence. He was simply a father who chose to stand tall when every safe path demanded he bow his head. A seemingly small choice to pick up a pen, yet powerful enough to drag the truth into the light and shake a corrupt structure that once seemed impregnable. If you have ever been looked down upon simply because of your background, or have remained silent for fear of losing the only thing you had, then this story belongs not only to Elias, it reflects you, somewhere in this life. Justice may be delayed, but it must always arrive. Do you believe in happy endings for good people? Share this story if it touched your heart. Hit follow and subscribe right now so you won't miss the next journeys.